Mark Rogers TV, Ohio State, talking Buckeyes with Brandon Zimmerman from the Buckeye Battle Cry. And we are just maybe about 5 or 6 weeks away from spring practice. So what Brandon and I plan to do is set you up with each and every position as we lead up to spring practice. And we're going to start right at the top with the position everybody loves to talk about. That's quarterback. And even though it's very settled at this point, you're only one play away. Brandon, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How about yourself, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. So I think we talked about it before we came on. You counted 17 years for JT Barrett.
Yes, I believe he is a redshirt 17th year senior for JT Barrett.
It is something else when you think back to what was going on almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, as we finished up August camp with Braxton Miller looking to conclude a great college career as quarterback for Ohio State, and then he went down, and then JT Barrett suddenly, Ohio State fans knew who he was, should have known who he was. A lot of people on the periphery had no idea, and then suddenly this kid from Texas who didn't play a senior season in high school suddenly thrust into the spotlight, and 2 weeks later has a down game against Virginia Tech, much of his undoing and not necessarily his fault, and then we know what happened from there. 12 weeks later, he's the Big Ten record holder for touchdowns in a season. But here we are a couple years later, Brandon, and some of the shines off of JT Barrett, whether that's offensive line related, wide receiver related. How would you assess his 2016 campaign?
As you mentioned, it's definitely a very weird situation with JT Barrett. I mean, he holds so many different records for the team, so many different records for the Big Ten. But after his freshman year, when he just came out and dominated all the way up until that Michigan game when he got hurt, it just kind of seemed like it's been going downhill somewhat. You wonder how much of that can be related back to the injury and how bad it was his freshman year, and then watching Cardale Jones take the Buckeyes to a championship game, to win it, to beat Bama, to beat the Ducks, and then come into his now sophomore year and lose his starting job from the get-go to Cardale Jones after he broke so many records. So you wonder how much of it is a mental thing. Coming into 2016, this was supposed to be the first year that everyone kind of expected him just to dominate from the beginning because he didn't have any sort of competition. His freshman year, he was third string quarterback 2 weeks before the opening game. Then Braxton Miller goes down. He jumps Cardale Jones to be the starter. Sophomore year, he's battling out with Cardale Jones again. So this was supposed to be the year that he came in with no distractions and just kind of went back to the old freshman that we saw, and it really didn't turn out to be that way. His 2016 year was, he won co-Big Ten Player of the Year, which is great. But for Buckeye fans, was just so many more expectations for him. I think he had a good season. I don't think JT Barrett would even tell you that he had a great season or the season that he expected to have. He definitely needs to improve on his throwing downfield, his decision-making, the timely manner of it going into next year. Because that seemed to be his downfall last year was maybe it wasn't trust in his wide receivers. Maybe it wasn't trust in his offensive line. There was just seemed to be something that JT Barrett just was not the guy that we're used to seeing, where he dropped back and was able to read through his progressions quickly and get the ball off.
Brandon, we'd almost have to backtrack and go through his 2014 season and look at every pass he threw and then chart 2015 and 16. But what was astonishing was after the issues against Virginia Tech were fixed, after losing by a couple touchdowns in that game, the team went on a roll. It was just startling to many of us how quickly he gained control of the offense, looked polished, looked poised, was throwing with anticipating where receivers were going to be, anticipating where the windows were, being extremely accurate. And then, like you say, it was a difficult choice for Urban Meyer. Many of us were swaying toward JT Barrett based on what we saw and based on his grasp of the offense and his being a more polished passer heading into 2015. But I certainly can't fault going with the guy who won the national championship. And of course, we weren't there in practice. And then he got into the lineup after obviously Cardell Jones faltered down the stretch. He didn't light the world on fire, but he played two of his better games right at the end against two quality opponents in Michigan and Notre Dame. It looked like, okay, the offense really came together at the end of 2015, should be ready to burst into 2016 despite losing a lot of pieces there. The leader's back, and he played well down the stretch. And, it just never looked good against any kind of decent competition. So the numbers look good, 63%, 24 TDs, 7 picks, but obviously the opponents are inferior most of the time, so it's difficult to judge on that. But he was never a great downfield thrower or a guy with a cannon, but his arm looked good enough, more than good enough. And now it looks to have regressed. I don't know if he ever got over that injury. I don't know.
You know, what everyone and what Coach Meyer and everyone loved about JT Barrett was just how mentally strong he is, how much of a leader he is. He battled a lot of stuff during the 2015 season, from losing his starting job to the DUI to being pulled and put into games. So like I said, it was really great to see him finish up the season last year against Michigan and against Notre Dame. Going into 2016, everyone kind of thought that's what we were going to see. Even from early on in 2016 to the end of 2016, I feel like there was a big difference between JT Barrett against Oklahoma and against Michigan. I was at both of those games. Against Oklahoma, like you're talking about, he was the old JT Barrett. He was throwing to lead wide receivers open. He wasn't waiting for them to break open before he threw the ball. He was confident. Going into the Michigan game and against Clemson, when I was at both of those games, he just wasn't doing that at all. If a wide receiver was not wide open, he was not throwing the ball. And that was the biggest difference I noticed between JT Barrett and Wilton Speight, or JT Barrett and Deshaun Watson, is that those quarterbacks, Speight and Watson, if their wide receivers weren't open, they would throw the ball to an area of the field where the wide receivers would be able to make a move and go to the ball. And I just wasn't seeing that from JT Barrett there at the end of last year. So I know I've mentioned it a few times on your show. I don't know if it's, that Penn State game where he just got demolished all game, or the Wisconsin game where there was a lot of pressure on him. There was a tough stretch for the Buckeyes there where the offensive line really struggled and JT Barrett got hit hard. And I wonder how much of that kind of had an effect on him when he was facing teams like Michigan and teams like Clemson, who have dominant defensive lines. He just did not look comfortable at all.
So regardless of who you root for, hopefully for the young man's sake, he's healthy and he's ready to go and feeling confident and secure in feeling that the rest of the guys are reliable and dependable to do their jobs, and trusting the wide receivers, trusting his offensive line, in particular the tackles, to get the job done. But he might have been a little bit shell-shocked, as you mentioned, because of what he had to endure mid-season against some of the better teams on the schedule. All right, in back of JT Barrett, we have plenty of talent, almost complete inexperience. We did see Joe Burrow throw 28 passes very effectively last year in mop-up duty. So it looks like Dwayne Haskins, as we talked about before we came on, and Joe Burrow appear to be ready to battle for this backup job.
Yes, I know there's a large portion of the Buckeye fan base that thinks that Joe Burrow and Haskins are going to be in a competition with JT Barrett as a starter. I just don't see that happening. JT Barrett's going to start. So we're going to go ahead with Barrett starting. I just don't see them benching JT Barrett here. As the backup, like you said, you've got Dwayne Haskins, who was a freshman last year, sat out all year. He was the person that played Deshaun Watson during the bowl games. A lot of people love him, heard nothing but great things. The coaching staff thinks he's a great quarterback. Joe Burrow was the backup last year. We saw him a few times, and Joe Burrow looked really good too. So Burrow is a Ohio kid. You've got Haskins from Maryland. Both those guys are going to be battling tight. You've also got Tate Martell, who I know Ben's been talking about a few times. Tate Martell is the 5-star dual threat quarterback out of Las Vegas. I really don't think he is going to factor into this year's quarterback rotation at all. He's likely to redshirt. Not that Tate Martell is not good or anything, but I think Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins are, more than capable of being the second and third string guys without wasting a year on Tate Martell. Ultimately, I think Joe Burrow holds on to it. I'm a big Joe Burrow fan. I think he's going to be a really good starting quarterback next year for the Buckeyes. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens between him and Dwayne Haskins. And as all Buckeye fans know, the second, third string quarterbacks are pretty darn important around these parts. So they're all going to see playing time. Last year, Haskins didn't because they didn't want to burn the red shirt. Now they don't have to worry about that. So in some of those really big blowout games early on, I would expect to see Burrow and Haskins getting some playing time.
247 Sports is rating Tate Martell as the 57th rated player in the nation, regardless of position. Number 2 quarterback, a dual threat guy out of Las Vegas, as Brandon mentions. Joe Burrow, if I'm shaking the cobwebs correctly, if I remember from a couple years ago, he is the all-time touchdown leader in the state of Ohio high school football, correct?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, so if he can carry that into college, then maybe JT Barrett has his Big Ten touchdown record broken. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. But 22 for 28 for 226 and 2 touchdowns with no picks in mop-up duty. Even though it was mop-up duty, good indication of what he can do at the next level against the next set of competition. So Brandon Zimmerman from the Buckeye Battle Cry joins me each and every Wednesday night. We break down Ohio State football. Of course, we're getting ready in the aftermath of National Signing Day to get you set for spring practice in just about 5 weeks or so. So we'll have positional breakdowns from now until then. Brandon, we appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you, Mark.